As the old saying goes, everybody loves a good villain, to the point that many will secretly root for them even if they know they probably won't win. And in the same vein, it's also common knowledge that the hero is often viewed as boring because they're a lot more limited in what they can do. Now, I've already argued against that very notion in my video on Superman, which you can find a link in the description to if you're interested, but that's not what I'd like to talk about in this video. Instead, I would like to discuss the widely known phenomenon of audiences loving the villain and despising the hero so much that it causes them to outright glorify one and vilify the other. And needless to say, there will be major spoilers for pretty much every movie I bring up ahead. So in case you don't want something ruined, you should keep your guard up. I won't be giving out any other spoiler warnings in this video. Okay, so just to reiterate, it is true in certain cases that the villain is legitimately in the right and the hero in the wrong, even if the narrative treats it the other way around. And when that does happen, it's most definitely the audience's right to call the writers out on it. I've even dedicated countless videos to explaining how important it is that the audience's sympathy always lie where the writer intends them to. As a man who's written books, I understand just how vital it is that a writer back up any claim they make with facts, because the audience will never just take your word for it, and actions do speak louder than words. But the thing is, there's a difference between characters being the victim of bad writing and characters who are perfectly written within the confines of their hero and villain archetypes, and the audience still not taking to those roles. I even dedicated an entire video to a specific case of that, which you can also find a link in the description too. And there's a few other examples of that I want to focus on in this video. Specifically what happens when the writer has done their job of justifying why the characters are heroes and villains, but the audience still ends up hating the hero and defending the villain anyway. Now, obviously, having sympathy for the villain or actively rooting for them is nothing new, and can be for any number of reasons. Sometimes we probably even see our darker or more mischievous sides in them, which can be why some find them so compelling. And this isn't even limited to the audience either, as one of famed B director Roger Corman's favorite endings to his own movies was when the monster wasn't destroyed and instead killed everybody save two characters, and his last scene triumphantly picking his teeth sitting on a pile of gold. He even seemed to take particular relish in interviews about the fact that the monster actually won. But to be fair, the movie was meant to be tongue-in-cheek, so such an ending does make sense. But for another, closer example to the phenomenon I'm referring to is actually from Alfred Hitchcock, who said he felt a degree of sympathy for all his villains, but the one he felt most sorry for was Lars Thorwald in Rear Window. And at first glance, it is easy to see where he's coming from, considering he's being harassed by a nosy neighbor, and even has a surprisingly humanizing moment when he practically begs him to tell him what he wants and asks what he ever did to him. But the thing is, what's just as easy to forget because of that is that he does deserve all of the torment he's going through. Jeffries is only spying on him because he's convinced Thorwald killed his invalid wife, and in the end he turns out to be 100% right. So when you really look at it, Thorwald is bringing everything on himself. and all Jeffries is trying to do is bring a man he suspects to be a killer to justice. In other words, Jeffries is most definitely the hero and Thorwald the villain in this scenario. Again, his words to Jeffries may make him pitiable, but the fact still remains that he himself killed an innocent woman in cold blood of his own free will, and thus deserves whatever bad things he has coming to him. He may not be pure evil, but he doesn't deserve to be seen as more sympathetic than Jeffries, who simply wants to do what any good person would do in his place. Now, to be fair, Hitchcock never said he sympathized with Thorwald more than Jeffries, or that what he did should be excused, just that he felt sorry for him. And I'm just trying to demonstrate how that pity can easily make somebody lose sight of who's really in the right or wrong here based off their own actions. Or to use an example most of you are probably more familiar with, ever since Disney's Wish came out, many have been trying to argue that King Magnifico was actually right about everything and that Asha was simply being a brat who pushed him over the edge. Now, I already dedicated a whole other video to explaining why that notion isn't exactly correct, which you can also find a link in the description too, but let me put it into very simple terms here. King Magnifico is a grown adult who's responsible for his own actions. If his reaction to being challenged, or his people going so far as to ask him questions, drives him to do something that he knows is a very bad idea, then that is on him. If he can't cope with pressure, then he shouldn't be in charge. Asha didn't make him turn to dark magic, or have him assume everybody was ungrateful just because they wanted answers they were entitled to have. He chose to do that all by himself, and if for no other reason, that makes him a villain. He could have chosen to handle the situation in a much more reasonable manner, but the fact that he didn't is his responsibility and his alone. And as far as Asha goes, maybe she did overreact herself, but that doesn't change the fact that she still had good intentions and at no point wishes to do harm to anybody. So once again, if for no other reason than that, that makes her the hero of the story, because she opposes the villain and has good intentions. Now, to be completely fair here, Wish suffers from quite a few writing problems, and the characterizations of Asha and King Magnifico are no different, so it's not as much of an open and shut case as it is with Jeffries and Thorwald. But the fact still remains that when judging the characters solely by their own actions and nothing else, the narrative does do enough to at least justify King Magnifico as the villain, and thereby Asha as the hero. Again, writing-wise it isn't great, but it is enough. Though the way audiences talk, you'd think Asha was the evil one that drove a benevolent king insane, and Magnifico is only a victim of her actions. And that's just not the case. But as I just noted, the bad writing doesn't do them any favors, so that could help explain the audience's reaction. But to go with an example that's harder to justify, there's Harry Potter, and specifically what's known as the Ron the Death Eater and Draco in leather pants effect. And while that applies more to fanfiction than audience reaction, the fact still remains that if you do read Harry Potter fanfiction, 99% of the time, if Ron is featured in a story, he'll be put in a horrible light and made out to be a terrible jerk. While if Draco Malfoy is featured, he'll be put in a great light and be made out to be misunderstood. And even outside of fanfiction, there are those who argue that Ron Weasley is a terrible friend to Harry, while also saying that Draco Malfoy is secretly a better person than he appears. But the thing is, if you look at how the characters actually behave, their designations as a hero and villain are more than justified. Sure, there are certain points where Ron does behave like a jerk, and Draco has his sympathetic or humanizing moments, but that's because these characters are written to be human. Ron Weasley isn't meant to be everybody's ideal best friend, and Draco Malfoy isn't meant to be the living embodiment of school bullies. They're both human beings with their own issues to work out. The difference is that Ron is a good person who occasionally lets his insecurities get the better of him and act like a jerk, which is something everybody is guilty of. While Draco is generally an unpleasant jerk who sometimes lets his better nature break through and shows there are lines he won't cross. And what's particularly interesting about this is that Ron goes out of his way countless times to help Harry, even putting his life on the line for him more than once, and most definitely proves himself to be a well-meaning person, while Draco has no qualms about making everybody miserable to amuse himself, and even being an accomplice to low-level torture. And yet people still vilify Ron for his few moments of jerky behavior, while forgiving Draco of all his bad deeds for his few sympathetic moments. Now sure, maybe the fact that Draco has more sex appeal with the ladies has something to do with that, but a mentality like that is still pretty hypocritical. It's like the hero can't do a single thing that the audience might find objectionable, or else they'll be seen as a horrible person, while the villain can do anything they want and people will make excuses for them, no matter how much the writing justifies their designations. And Harry Potter is frankly only the tip of the iceberg. I could go over literally hundreds of examples of this happening in stories. This phenomenon is everywhere. But if I had to pick just one other, particularly egregious example of this, it would have to be the main cast of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, and especially Mary Jane. You would not believe the things I've heard people say about how much they hated her and how badly they wanted to see Peter dump her or even end up dead. But when you really look at it, what has she done that's so horrible? In the first movie, it's clear that she suffers from major self-esteem issues because of her abusive home life, but that she's also the only person at school other than Harry to be nice to Peter. And she has no reason for that. She's nice to him because she's not a jerk. Even her starting to date Harry is on him because he knew Peter had a crush on her. She didn't until much later on. Honestly, there isn't a single thing she does that can be considered anywhere close to horrible. Now in the second movie, she does give Peter quite a bit of grief. But one has to keep in mind that the audience has the luxury of being privy to things that she isn't. Because just try, for one moment, to see things from her perspective. She offered to date him, and he turned her down without any explanation. And then he keeps showing up late or entirely missing out on things that are important to her. And when she repeatedly asks him why, he only gives her vague excuses and never explains himself very well, even when he has a legitimate reason. How would that look to most people if they didn't know any better? Is it any wonder she comes to believe Peter doesn't care about her and grows attached to a man that actually appears to make an effort? Sure, it's clear she still feels something for Peter, but that probably comes from the fact that she still thinks deep down that he might be telling the truth and that there's more to what's going on than she knows. In other words, when she finds out Peter is Spider-Man, her demeanor changes because it finally explains everything. He really did love her and was telling the truth. He really was making an effort, and his superheroics are what kept getting in the way. Now, sure, maybe leaving her fiancé at the altar wasn't all that great or nice, but it is better than going through with the marriage, quickly realizing it was a mistake, and ending up divorced with everybody accusing her of only marrying him for the settlement. Again, I'm not saying running away was the best thing to do. I'm just pointing out that it was better than the alternative. Now, I will freely admit in the third movie, she does act pretty stupid, but that movie did have quite a few writing issues all around. And even then, her more extreme actions are the result of Harry's manipulations. She even tries to help Peter at the climax by throwing a cinder block on Venom. The point here is, there is nothing within the narrative of any of these movies that justifies the negative reaction that some fans feel towards her. Sure, she doesn't always do the best thing, but again, she's written to be a human being and doesn't do anything morally reprehensible. Nothing that would justify audiences cheering when Peter accidentally hits her in the nightclub. I mean, come on, wouldn't any reasonable person admit that isn't warranted and that such a punishment does not fit whatever crimes she's committed up until that point? There's even some who've tried to argue that she really is the gold digger that Norman says she is, which is exactly why she offered to date Peter at a point when he couldn't even pay the rent. And even after she found out he was Spider-Man, being a hero doesn't automatically make him rich. Frankly, it's shown to be the exact opposite. Especially because, as I just pointed out, the revelation clears up his behavior. That's why it changes her mind. Or even the scene itself where Norman calls her a gold digger. People get on her back for taking it out on Harry. Sure, she is blaming the wrong person, and he did defend her. But you notice he's a lot quicker to defend his father, and more passionately at that? Frankly, she has every right to call Norman a creep after what he said, considering he doesn't even know her, and he's making assumptions about her intentions and giving his son horrible advice. Again, it may have been wrong to take it out on Harry, but her anger is most definitely justified. But this doesn't just extend to Mary Jane either, as there are those who've said it's, quote, a little horrible that Peter tries to woo her after finding out she's engaged. And it's like, Peter is a 20-year-old carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders and going through a bad existential crisis. And now he's just found out that the woman he loves is marrying somebody else. Isn't it basically a given that he would have a reaction like that? Cut the kid a little slack, especially because he never tries that again once he has a clearer head and even tells her he doesn't love her to protect her. So saying that his reaction in that scene is a little horrible is a massive overstatement when one takes his mental state into account. Though ironically, where a legitimate case can be made for this is actually in the character of Harry, because unlike Mary Jane and Peter, his actions honestly don't back up his designation as an anti-hero. Sure, he does have his good moments and redeems himself in the end, but it's hard to sympathize with him most of the time when he is essentially acting like a spoiled rich kid who throws a tantrum when he doesn't get what he wants. I even found myself thinking while watching Spider-Man 3 that I wouldn't have minded if it had just been Sandman and Venom and Harry was the one they had cut out, as I found myself way more invested in their stories than his. Obviously, the movie wouldn't have worked that way, but I think you get the point. At least with Harry, viewing him in a worse light than the narrative paints him is justified, because his actions don't really back up that designation. But with Mary Jane, that's not the case at all, as her behavior makes complete sense, at least in the first two movies. So as I said before, this need the audience has to vilify good characters and condone bad ones is everywhere, whether it's justified by bad writing or not. Like, people hate Mary Jane, but will make excuses all day long for the Green Goblin committing mass murder because he made sacrifices for his company. Even if it was wrong for them to kick him out, that doesn't justify anything he does in retaliation. Or people hated Eddie Brock, not because he committed fraud to get a job, openly said being evil makes him happy, or that he murdered Harry in cold blood, but because they found him annoying. Really shows you where some people's priorities are, huh? But to an extent, that is actually warranted, since a character's entertainment value, regardless of their in-story actions, is often what's most important about them in a movie. And this is more about when people take this kind of thing too far. Because like it or not, Brock was actually a pretty well-written villain. Now, as I just noted, this video isn't to tear down people who like or dislike characters for strange reasons, or have a love of a particular villain or hatred of a certain hero. All I'm trying to do is point out that sometimes audiences can love or hate a specific character, even when the writer perfectly does their job of demonstrating why that character has the designation they do. And particularly how a heroic character will get endless grief for doing one bad thing, even if they do a million other good things, while those same people will make a million excuses for a villain that's tortured and killed countless people. And I do get it. These are fictional characters we're talking about. So it's not like this is a commentary on how people are, or I'm saying this is a trend that should stop, as you're absolutely free to like or dislike any character you want to. The only point trying to be made here is something I've already noted in countless other videos, which is that audiences can be very fickle and will sometimes love or hate specific characters no matter what the writer does or how the narrative presents them. And I speak from personal experience when I say that if there's one thing the audience hates, it's being told one thing and being shown another. If the narrative claims something without fully committing to it or backing it up, then that is one of the easiest ways to end up with this type of problem, and somewhat understandably at that. And that also might help explain why so many will hate the hero and defend the villain, because their designations compel them to feel the opposite way about them. But that's only speculation. I'm no expert in these matters. In all honesty, it's probably a combination of many different things that causes that. But whatever the reason is, one can't deny that people's compulsion to sometimes vilify the hero and defend the villain, even in well-written stories, is one of the stranger side effects of being a storyteller, and one that you can't really do much about when all's said and done. Okay, I think I've more than made my point here. So now I think it's about time you tell me. Do you love the villain more than the hero in stories? And if you don't, why do you believe so many do? And do you think that such a mentality is justified in certain cases, or not? Whatever it is, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And as I said before, I'm not trying to say that people who indulge in this are bad or that they're engaging in stories the wrong way. I was only trying to explain how this whole thing works from a more outside looking in perspective and wasn't placing judgment on anyone. And if you think I had this topic all wrong, that is perfectly okay too. You are entitled to your own opinion and can feel about this or any other topic we discuss here that you want to. And thank you all for watching. I very, very much appreciate it. And I hope to see you all next time.